Please be seated. There is a lovely chapel located just behind the top of the Mount of Olives near Jerusalem. It is thought to be the place where Jesus mounted the colt or the donkey, depending upon which gospel we read, that he rode in triumph into Jerusalem. And in the chapel itself, there's this lovely stepping stone, a mounting platform to assist someone to climb on an animal. There are charming but faded frescoes about that moment when the first palm procession began. And when you go there, and I do hope that you will someday go to Jerusalem, you will not only see all that, but you will, if you're like most Christian pilgrims, begin the procession route yourself from that very chapel. Doesn't quite look like it did in the day of Jesus. It's a lot busier now, much more urban. There are very busy streets to dodge across. There are hawkers of souvenirs at every corner, and TV antennas and electric wires strung everywhere. What you may not know until you begin that journey is that you begin at the top of a hill that is actually taller than Jerusalem. And you stand at the top of the Mount of Olives, and if you could see Jerusalem through the buildings, you would realize that you are taller than that hill. And so you walk steadily downhill, down into the Kidron Valley before coming back up again to get into Jerusalem. And I will tell you, the walk is slightly terrifying. The road is steep, there are no sidewalks, so you're walking in the street, and auto traffic occurs all along the way. And I will tell you that the drivers of the Middle East are overly confident and largely oblivious to people on foot. Partway down the hill, you will stop at a little church called Dominus Flevit. The Lord wept. And you will look across the narrow valley, and you will be right at the level of the Temple Mount, just across the Kidron Valley. In the days of Jesus, it would have been the Temple of Solomon, the Holy of Holies. And you will stop and reflect on that moment in the gospel when Jesus weeps for Jerusalem. And then you continue your descent all the way down until you reach the bottom of the Kidron Valley and the Garden of Gethsemane. And as you descend down to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jerusalem, the golden city, seems to rise above you, almost looming over you as you drop down to the valley floor. And then to get to Jerusalem, you have to climb back up. Almost, it seems, straight up into Jerusalem. You know, it's hard to believe, having walked that walk, that the people who joined Jesus on that procession could sing and dance and wave palms all the way from Bethphage to the gates of Jerusalem. Who knew that belief that the Messiah was here would be so aerobically beneficial? Me, I was puffing. And you know, those poor Galilean peasants who came with Jesus to Jerusalem could not afford the price of a room in Jerusalem during Passover. Price gouging is a long-standing human tradition. They could process into the city and wander around. They could visit the temple as good Jews, perhaps have a meal in a rented room, but at night they had to go out of the city, back down the hill to camp out at the foot of the Mount of Olives. That's why they were in the Garden of Gethsemane that night, because they couldn't afford a hotel room. And during the great feast, they would have walked up and down those hills many, many times. So I wonder if those the locals who cheered Jesus that day grasped the oddity that the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah, could not afford a bed in Jerusalem, but had to sleep out of doors in an olive grove. It's not pointed out in our gospel this day, but there was another procession, perhaps not that exact day, but certainly that week, because the Roman overlords had come up from their city on the coast each Passover to increase their control over this always restive populace. Passover, we will remember, is the feast of liberation, of release from slavery. And the prophet Isaiah's words must have been on many minds and many hearts that day when he says, Who will contend with me? Let us stand up together. Who are my adversaries? Let them confront me. It is the Lord God who helps me. Who will declare me guilty? Those are not words any conqueror wants to hear from their subjects. So yes, the Romans were there, on guard, watching and waiting, ready to crush any resistance. And yet there was rejoicing. There was rejoicing when Jesus came down that hill and then ascended again into Jerusalem. There was that fearful but giddy energy of those who thought they were alive when the Messiah had finally come. Imagine that sense of, oh my gosh, it's happening in my life. This procession released all the pent-up hope and fear and worry and wonder that had built up during the long years of oppression by one conqueror after another. Perhaps those who had envied their ancestors, who lived in the time of Solomon and David, those who had lived in the glory years, now, they thought they too would know what it's like to be on top and to know power and privilege. Perhaps there were people there who just wanted to see Jerusalem made great again. And perhaps there were some who just thought it was an interesting way to spend an afternoon, wondering if this stranger was really what others said he was, or just another crazy person preaching nonsense. What sense should we make of this day? Was it truly triumphal, or was it somehow ironically triumphal? Did all the people truly cheer Jesus all the way down and all the way back up again, or were there some who were jeering him, jeering this ragtag group of peasants from far away? Of course, today we know the arc of the parade, don't we? We know it begins in this mad notion that Jesus might be the new David and drive out the Romans and return Judah to greatness. And maybe others just hope that Jesus would give some backbone to their own leaders and press for relief from taxation and oppression, or just maybe give some consideration to their traditional way of life. We also know that it went quickly wrong. That moment of joyous possibility did not last 3 days. We know that soon we will be at Maundy Thursday and at the Last Supper, and then the darkness and the loss and the destruction and the betrayal and the death will come. Soon it will become dark, too soon, and raw power will seem triumphant once again. I fear we leave Palm Sunday too soon. We seem to be in a hurry to get through Holy Week itself as fast as we possibly can, so perhaps to pretend it was all a dream and that only Easter matters. We do not linger in those few moments when it might have been so different. And we do not want to linger in the rising darkness of Maundy Thursday or the agony of Good Friday. And indeed, before we leave church today, we will recount all of Holy Week. I fear we leave Palm Sunday too soon. So I invite us all to linger this year in our Palm Sunday procession, if only in our hearts and minds. I invite us to walk spiritually down the path from Bethphage. Stop along the way to look directly at Jerusalem, so unaware of what is to come in so many ways. I invite us to pause and to weep as Jesus wept, knowing that so many of our hopes and dreams are lost prematurely. And then I invite us to walk all the way down to the Garden of Gethsemane, if only in our souls, and to pray there among the ancient olive trees, to dive deeply into our fears, our failures, our worries, and welcome them. Yes, welcome them, and bring them into God's healing presence. And then as we do, I invite us to look up to the heart of power, the heart of wealth, the heart of privilege as typified by the Jerusalem looming over us all. And I invite us to walk up to power, to walk past the house of Ananias, the courts, the jail cells where power thinks it rules. Walk by it all, confident in God who knows us deeply and loves us anyway. Yet as we walk, or perhaps even dance, or just strut a little, speak our truth in love to power. And then I invite us, if only in our minds, to walk into the temples of our world, to look around and be not overly impressed with the gold and the marble, for none of these will last. I invite us all to stand in the halls of power and greed and look at the cracks in it all. Be aware and be wise at the poor foundations of so much of the who and what of earthly power. And then walk back down the hill, away from earthly temptations, away from the blandishments of wealth, away from human depravity. Come down the hill and come back to the earth. Come back to that spiritual garden that has been prepared for us from the beginning of creation and rest. And then I invite us to do it all over again. And I offer these same words to those who walked yesterday all over this country, to raise up new ideas and new energies and new plans for dealing with the terrifying gun violence in our midst. And I remind myself that we must do this again and again and again. It's not just one procession that will bring us where we need to be. We will have to do these walks. We will have to do this work again and again and again, not only in our own hearts and souls, but in all of our cities, in all of our villages, in our highways and our byways. We walk for ourselves, we walk for our loved ones, and for those who will come after us. And as we do, we must see all of creation, see all of humanity, all of it. See it with open eyes and hearts. And so, yes, we walked with Jesus in our imaginations this morning on a Palm Sunday, but we walk with Jesus not just this one day, not just this 1 week that we call holy, but we walk with Jesus every day of our lives. And as we do, I invite us to linger in all of these places, for they all have things to teach us if only we have eyes to see and ears to hear. And by doing that walk, and by lingering, and by watching and hearing and reflecting, we honor all of creation by our attention, by our being awake to all that is. So imagine our lives as being lived between Bethpage on one mount and Jerusalem on another, between the Garden of Gethsemane at the bottom and the Temple Mount at the top. Lives lived between the grand halls of power and the simple huts of peasants, between the simple pleasures of being at table with friends, and yes, the lonely agony of the cross, living between life and death every day of our lives. And so I invite us to imagine our lives as both ascent and descent, as both high and low, both grand and meager. Imagine even our lives as simultaneously too long and too short, life as parade and charade. Jesus invites us this Palm Sunday to walk with him. And God invites us every day of our lives to walk with God. Imagine ourselves, imagine us as those blessed as the ones who come in the name of the Lord. Stay with me, God says. Walk with me, Jesus says. Be with me and in me as I am in you now and always. Amen.